To defeat an enemy, you must know them. Not just their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art. Welcome to the Chiss Ascendancy podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to
The Chiss Ascendancy.
Episode 59. Today, we're getting a sandwich, and we got a little, some bread, and some meat, and
Oh my god.
some High Republic ketchup. So,
I had a friend in high school, and he would just eat ketchup sandwiches. And that's like the most disgusting thing I can think of. Literally 2 slices of bread and ketchup in the middle.
that's like something that orcs would eat in Lord of the Rings.
That's like something an orphan would eat because they can't afford real food.
Come on, ketchup packet, something.
Dude, that's rough.
Sissy boy.
He enjoyed it. Like, that was a delicacy for him. It was sicko. Sicko.
Yeah, if you're going to make a sandwich with just one item, probably go with a nice jam.
Right?
And just...
Or like
that's
peanut
what
butter
toast is.
or...
Honey.
Yeah.
Honey Sammy.
But yeah, just ketchup.
If you ever became a fighter, your nickname should be Honey Sammy.
Why?
I don't know. I just... Honey Sandwich, you know?
Yeah, I knew
But
what
your
you
name
meant.
is Samuel, so...
Yeah, I got the joke. I just...
It'd be funny.
I don't like it.
So, as you can guess, we are doing a High Republic episode today. So, we've done... Man, this is... I think that of all the items, all the mediums of Star Wars content, I think the High Republic has probably gotten the most exposure on the show out of everything, because we did an Expectancy episode. We did a Light of the Jedi review episode. We're doing another interview.
Have we talked about the comics at all?
Maybe a little bit the first one. We've done more. We've done a lot of Mandalorian stuff, but
Yeah. And Clone Wars.
I would say that the per capita is higher for High Republic just because there's a lot less to look at. But it's the newest thing, and so Claudia Gray, who is actually she's liked some of our posts before. I don't know if she's following us. She might just be following the hashtag of her own name on Instagram. We'll see.
That'd be cool.
But she did like some of our posts from before when we talked about Master and Apprentice and things like that.
Fantastic
And
book.
so she is the author of the book Into the Dark. You like that?
Yeah, nice.
And so it's a young adult novel, but don't write it off, because I think that when I first started reading Star Wars and I would see a young adult novel, I would be like, "Oh, that's just for kids." But I really think it's late teens.
Yeah,
And
here's the thing.
it's really just the central story is around a young adult.
Yeah, Justine Ireland wrote Test of Courage, which is true to type. It's a children's novel. Unless you're a completist, I don't recommend it, honestly. It was just so-so. And you're not really going to miss anything by not reading
There's
it.
a lot of, I'm not going to name names, but there are YouTube channels they get a lot of love from like Star Wars outlets, you know? And I was listening to a review for Into the Dark just as a refresher, you know? Because when you're reading a book, the last third is really on your mind once you're done. And you got to kind of go back and drudge up the beginning. Anyways, one YouTuber was like, okay, so this is the third book to have been released behind Light of the Jedi and Test of Courage. And I would say, you know, it's right there in the middle. Light of the Jedi was amazing. Test of Courage was good. And this one I like to, you know, they're in the middle. And I was like, that was the best way to say Test of Courage. I read it, you know.
Yeah, just give me my little merit badge and let me move on with my life. I'll never revisit that book.
I actually did not read it.
Yeah.
Because you had read it and you were like, I was like, is there something, you know, do I need to read this to keep the story going? And you're like, absolutely not.
No. And the thing is, I think it's only like 4.5 hours long if you listen to it on Audible.
Yeah.
Which is usually like, that's a light snack, but it took me forever to get through it because I'd listened to
Who's it read by?
Some person.
You know what I could do?
Nobody I knew.
You know what I could do is that eventually we'll have to get into the Alphabet Squadron trilogy that they just finished. And it's like post Imperial Reign, pre First Order.
We can call that episode Alphabet Soup.
Yeah, exactly. So there's 3 books. They just came out with the 3rd book. I have the first one on Audible already. So what I'll probably do is download and get through Test of Courage, if it's really as non-palatable as you say. And then what I'll do is Audible has a if you didn't like it, trade it in thing. And I'll just trade it in for a book I know I'll like.
Clever.
Which I've already pre-ordered the Thrawn book for 2 months down the road. So I can't trade it in for that. But I think you have a year. Once you buy the book, you have a year to trade it in if you didn't like it. So
interesting.
There are people I know that they just trade in books like crazy, and they're just listening to tons of books at a time because they'll listen to a book and they immediately trade it in. I like to feel like I own the audiobook afterward. I mean, you do, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't want to trade in Heir to the Empire for something and then not have that ready to go again in my queue.
Yeah, I do re-listen quite a bit.
Yeah. Yes, for me, it's Heir to the Empire, Legacy of the Force, stepping outside of Star Wars. The Harry Potter audiobooks are always really high quality. You can't beat Jim Dale. Yeah, he's fantastic. So, Into the Dark is it's a great book. There's nothing about the book that if you're an adult versus a young adult, there's nothing in there that you're like, this is sissy stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's like really out of reach.
No,
You know
I
what
think
mean?
that
For
as I'm
regular adult, I guess.
Right.
You know?
As I was reading it, I was realizing that when I was thinking when you go to the Scholastic Book Fair and it's like, this one's for people who can read reading level 4.
Right.
And I'd be like, oh gosh, C-Spot Run. All right, $5, you know. So that's kind of when I first saw the launch for the Force Awakens book stuff that was coming out. There was that book called Lost Stars, which I believe was by Claudia Gray. And there are many, many people that say that anything in new canon, Lost Stars is their favorite book. And it's a young adult book. And so as I was like, well, everybody keeps talking about it.
I think Master and Apprentice is technically a young adult book as well.
No way.
Yeah, I think so.
No, it's not because of the hardback is the size of a regular hardback. Young adults, the hardbacks are always smaller. Have you noticed that?
Is that real? Mm-hmm. Explain to me Rackety Tam.
That's a full-sized novel because it's because it's a fantasy whatever. Like, it's not necessarily for a specific thing.
Are you talking about size of the book or thickness of the book?
How tall it is.
Yeah, Rackety Tam was huge.
No, I know.
But he wrote for children.
Well, all the Redwall books, I'm talking about specifically in Star Wars, how they catalog it. For instance, like...
we're going to see what the Google says.
That's what I've always heard. At least when it applies to Star Wars. Lost Stars is a smaller hardback. Into the Dark was smaller. But like Light of the Jedi, Darth Bane, those things are all that larger hardback size.
Where does it tell me?
Are you going to look up...
It just says novel. It would specify young adult novel, wouldn't it?
Yeah, Master and Apprentice is definitely an adult novel. I mean,
Why
not
did
like
I feel like it was young.
Not
adult?
like not that kind of adult novel, but it's for grown-ups.
50 Shades of Claudia Gray.
50 Shades of Real Averroes. Which is funny.
Late.
It's funny because Claudia Gray wrote that book and talks about the sexuality of the Jedi, and it's kind of in this book a lot. Not a lot, but early on.
Pretty up front.
Yeah.
They're like, Jedi, huh? Eunuchs? No sex? Okay.
Sucks. That's basically the point they're trying to get across. Okay, so Into the Dark is really great. So you basically have your main character who is Reath Silas. He's a Jedi Padawan.
Yeah. But I think he's like kind of advanced in I think he's 17 or 18.
Yeah, he's like 17 years old or something like that. Yeah. He is, okay, so he's basically to the point where his master is allowing him to go on journeys and things to try to advance his So Reith as a character is very, he's kind of a bookworm. He's a studier. He wants to be, his thing is he would rather have the crappier apartment or whatever you want to call it, dorm, closest to the archives. He'd rather have the smaller, worse dorm closer to the archives because that's his passion, is knowledge and books and learning and stuff like that, which is great. But his master wants him to expand his horizons, and basically, yes, you're an amazing Jedi on the scholastic side of things, but can you be more well-rounded? And it's interesting because Jorah Mali, which is his master's name, her previous apprentice, who is Des Rydan, it was really hard for me to, because of course we listened on Audible, it was hard for me to see him as a human being because the voice that the guy used for him was totally a Twi'lek-style voice. Did you pick up on that?
I kind of associated him in my mind with Talon Card. So
okay, yeah.
That's kind of
it was just like,
me.
I'm Des Rydan. And I was like, this guy's a mixture of he's a Twi'lek Hondo? But
it's kind of like a Spanish voice.
Yeah. But it was kind of, it kind of flirted back and forth sometimes between Spanish and French, which that French accent is totally a Twi'lek thing.
Yeah. So the thing about Reith, though, is that he's kind of a try-hard. So even though his interests are mainly scholastic, there's a point where, push comes to shove, and he's like, but even though it wasn't his interest, who was still number one in all the dueling classes?
Yeah.
Reith Silas.
Well, it turns out that he's an amazing Jedi.
Yeah. And it's not that he was like naturally talented. He just works really, really hard. Is something that his master was kind of observing very early on in the novel.
Right. Well, there's a guy that I work with that's an older gentleman, and his thing that I learned from him is think for me. Like if you're out at a job site somewhere, basically the concept of do your best to never redelegate to your boss. So if we're out on a project somewhere, if I keep calling my boss and asking, hey, what color do you want this in? Okay, what do you want to do for this? Okay, well, how, if we're going to cut this wood, should I get this kind of wood or this kind of wood? And at this point, basically, it'll be easier for him just to do the job.
Right.
And so Reith is the perfect think for me kind of guy. Like he's a self-starter. He's motivated. He's just kind of at the beginning, not wimpy, but just very reserved. His natural bent is definitely towards knowledge, studying.
Well, and that's kind of the quest, I think, for him.
He's the Obi-Wan.
Yeah, it's not that
the
he
Anakin
is incapable of pursuing adventure. It's just that he
not
would rather not to. So it's kind of about him learning what it means to be a Jedi and taking on all the aspects of the job as opposed to just really settling for what he would like to do.
Right. It's interesting because obviously the character advances, and that's one of the characteristics of a young adult novel is
there's a lot of character development.
That's important to young adult reading, which is cool. So his thing is, it turns out some of your greatest strengths are not the strengths you come by naturally, which is a cool concept. So Reith and there's a Master Comac, and there's no pictures of him.
Yeah, I would like to have some pictures of him just so
in my
I can kind of visualize
mind,
him.
he looks just like Qui-Gon Jinn because the guy's voice kind of read like Qui-Gon Jinn, and throughout the book he does Qui-Gon type things.
I kind of see him as a little bit older than Qui-Gon.
Yeah, I think so too.
Maybe not as tall, a little bit broader.
Yeah. So you're saying me when I'm old? So Reith is there with Master Comac,
who obviously I love because he has such a Qui-Gon-esque character.
Yeah.
And
he was probably the coolest character in the book.
Yeah, I liked that even in the...
Well, the coolest character we'll get to in a second, but...
Are we talking...
We'll get there.
Yeah. But yeah, no, he was just cool because he was really advanced. I mean, he was a Jedi Master. You don't get there easily. And he still had things about the Jedi Code that he, couldn't really get behind. So it was kind of interesting watching him grapple with those things. I really enjoyed the
way that they brought some of those questions about was, in the original trilogy, or the prequel trilogy more than the original, the prequel trilogy, when Anakin struggles with something, you're not allowed to ask questions. Right. And that's why secrecy is a thing, which leads to the destruction of the Jedi. And I think one of the points of this era pointing out the High Republic is we're really seeing 200 years before the beginning of the end, because the rigidness is starting to grow within the Jedi of it is what it is because it is. This novel talks about that a lot. How come you're supposed to have a master for your whole life? Even when you become a knight, that's still your master. You still see him that way. You know what I mean? We know that because in the original trilogy, Obi-Wan still calls Yoda his master and says, "So was I, if you remember." Like, there's still that relationship there. Can I speak if I may? Like, there's still that,
I think that kind of exists in all areas of life.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
it's hard to just
you can't
be
just
somebody's subordinate and then just become a peer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And in that same vein of thought, have someone that is so important to your development, or for your apprentice, someone who's so important to your development as far as leadership goes. But if something terrible were to happen to them, I guess we're going to move on from it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really work on your, you don't process your emotions. There's no time for grief. And so anyways, I don't want to unpack it too much, but so they're going on a journey, and there's not a whole lot written about what they're going to go do. They're just going to the Outer Rim because, of course, in this era of time, the Republic is expanding and trying to bring wealth and prosperity to all areas of their known galaxy. But there's also a lot that the Outer Rim has to offer. So it's a cool trade going on. Of course, Starlight Beacon is a thing that's about to happen. And so this is the beginning of this novel takes place just before the Great Disaster, which is kind of at the heart of all the events within Light of the Jedi.
That's the main uniting factor across all the different platforms
so
far.
So you have Reath Silas, and then you've got Master Comac, and then you have Reath's basically. I've heard it, kind of described as his big Jedi brother because he's the previous Padawan to his master, who is Des Rydan. And Des is cool because Des is the opposite of Reath. He has knowledge, he's willing to learn, but adventure is kind of his thing. So they're part of the group. And then you also have this character. I'll let you kind of unpack her a little bit because she was, I could tell you I liked her character a lot.
This is Orla Jareni. So she's an interesting concept because she's kind of like Ahsoka before Ahsoka, in a way that there's a concept that they introduced that I guess is done away with by the time we get to the Phantom Menace era, and she's what's called a way seeker.
Yeah.
So it's essentially a Jedi that has kind of come to parting terms with the Jedi Council.
Right.
Whether it be they want to, discover different interests, or like they talked about somebody became like a famous singer or something like that. Yeah. So they stepped away from the Jedi Order.
Well, it's interesting because I think that you have to be approved to be a way seeker. So it's kind of like, it's not,
it's like an amicable thing.
Yeah. I'm not leaving the Order.
Right.
But there are things about the Force that I want to know more about.
Right. And so
which it was interesting to me that this concept and this character was a thing, but there's the character Stellan Gios, maybe, is the character from Light of the Jedi. Him and Avar Kriss, you can tell, kind of have a lot of chemistry. And remember, he was...
You're talking about Elzar?
Yeah, there you go. Elzar Mann, sorry. I was surprised that he wasn't a way seeker because he kind of fit the bill when I was hearing about what a way seeker was.
I think the main difference is that...
I guess he doesn't disagree necessarily with the council.
And that's kind of one of the fundamental things about Orla's character is that, we're talking about different things of struggling with reconciling growing in the Force and sort of the code of the Jedi, which isn't necessarily the same thing as the light side of the Force.
Right.
And there's this one line in the book that's kind of like really defining for this character, where it says, it took her a long time to reconcile that if the Jedi were telling her not to listen to the Force because she's very instinctual, or I guess instinctive is the right word, but she really relies on her instincts as opposed to maybe like what she was trained to do. If she feels like she's supposed to do something else. So,
which that concept of don't trust your instincts. That seems to permeate all the way to the Phantom Menace, because Qui-Gon is kind of a salmon upstream by saying use your instincts. You know?
Yeah, but she says, it took her a long time to reconcile that if the Jedi were telling her not to listen to the Force, it wasn't the Force that was wrong.
Right.
So that's kind of like a theme throughout the book, but it's really personified through Orla, that she would have, kind of that relationship with the Jedi where she's like, I respect you, I love you, or whatever, but I'm going to do something else.
Right.
And she's kind of cool. You see her in like the concept art from like the very beginning of the release. She's the one, it looks like she has 2 lightsabers, but it's just it's a foldy double-bladed lightsaber.
Similar to
kind of like Rey.
Dark Rey. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a really cool character. You know what? When they first introduced her, I was like, is she going to be a problem? Like, that's kind of how I pictured it, which kind of shows how rigid I am in my Jedi beliefs. Oh, this chick's got questions. We should kick her out. But she ended up being really kind of the laminin, if you will, the glue of the team.
Yeah, because I don't know, she just had a foot in every camp, but she was
not
really,
in a ratty kind of way, but in a
she had enough in common with everybody that she was kind of helped to unite.
I was going to say her empathy extended to this situation, this situation, and this situation, and she can see where everybody knows why they think they're right, and she's the one who's had the will to open up her mind to maybe there's more out there.
Yeah.
So Orla Jareni, very cool character. So it's Dez, Orla Jareni, Master Comac, and Reath Silas. Those are the 4 Jedi going on this journey.
Main Jedi on the journey.
So right off the bat, it's funny because they're supposed to have this lavish ship that's supposed to take them out to the Outer Rim, and it breaks down. And who shows up to take them but Space Matthew McConaughey?
Yeah.
Who, for as sexy as he looks, apparently is not really a sexual kind of guy.
Yeah, I thought it was funny when it was kind of analyzing him for the first time, but it was through Reath's lens, and he's like, who is this guy? Is this guy on spice? No, how much spice is this guy on?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like he's for sure on drugs, but now we just need to know how much. But he was a really cool, he was Space Matthew McConaughey. He was just really super chill. He was but he had his head on straight, and he knew what he was talking about.
He kind of reminded me of, he's kind of a more country version of like a Star-Lord character. Like kind of goofy, but like, whenever Star-Lord and Rocket are piloting and it like really gets down to the nitty-gritty, they're amazing at what they do. Yeah, that's kind of how this guy is.
Yeah, he's just kind of quirky, but he's, for all, I guess if you looked at super objectively, he's like one of the best pilots in his little guild or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure. Man, I cannot remember.
The Bind Guild.
Yeah, what is this guy's name though? Yeah.
I knew it until you asked me.
Sorry, I couldn't remember.
It's
dude.
Leox Jossi.
There you go, Leox.
I always remember it because it sounds like it reminds me of the Lorax.
Yeah. But he's kind of, if you're listening to the audio, but he's kind of, hey, my name's Leox, and we're gonna have a great time. Like it is Space Matthew McConaughey. It's cool because like I thought that he would be like a super annoying flirt the entire time, so it was kind of nice that he wasn't. I think that he's one of those guys that's like, why have sex when I can have spice? Like that's kind of his. Not that he says that, but he was like,
dude, I thought it was funny that his one takeaway was like, all these people chasing tail, but man, I freed up a heap of time.
Yeah, he was like, I've got so much time on my hands, and that's why I've become such a great person. Okay, so he's the captain of the ship that they go on is called the Vessel, which is like such a dumb like.
Yeah, it's kind of like just the running joke. He's funny thing. He's like, welcome to the Vessel. And they're like, what's the name of the ship? And he's like, the Vessel.
Yeah, imagine like he thinks that joke is so funny that he really committed to it. It's like, paint it on the side, Vessel. And so the most interesting character in the book by far is his first mate.
His navigator.
His navigator. Yeah, he's kind of the right-hand man. Kind of the strong, silent type. But he is kind of the rock of the group. He's the steadiest one. Geode. if you're watching via, or if you're listening, sorry,
just listening. Geode is.
If you're not watching on YouTube,
he's a rock. He's an actual rock.
He's a rock.
The boulder.
Yeah, not
he's an actual
he is
not Dwayne Johnson the Rock.
Yeah,
he's like an actual
Can
rock.
you smell? Not a human being that calls themselves the Rock. Not a character that looks like a rock. Not a person who has a stoic expression and doesn't say much.
Not a rock monster. Not the mountain giants from the Hobbit trilogy.
No, we are talking about a rock.
An actual rock.
An
rock
actual
and roll.
rock. And
he rocks.
He rocks. I'll be honest. I loved this character.
I enjoyed it because it's one of those things because you're seeing everything from the perspective of the Jedi.
It needs to be in a book.
Right.
It needs to be in a book.
Because they get there and he's like, and this is our navigator, Geode. And he's like, he laughs and he goes, that's just a nickname because apparently his real name, you can't say it unless you don't have a mouth.
Yeah. I don't know how. Okay. So obviously, one of the things that I haven't enjoyed about this whole thing of the High Republic is, so Disney owns Star Wars, and Disney obviously is very politically correct, is what it is. And for depending on what kind of person you are, maybe you're like, yeah, that's a good thing. Political correctness is good. And maybe you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're not a fan of it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But I have seen a lot of hate from people who refuse to get into the content at all because they're like, it doesn't matter, this isn't real to me because Disney's just a PC, blah 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 blah. And so one of the main characters who gets the pushback on that is my friend Geode here, and but he's a kind soul, he never pushes back, and so it irritates me because of course the concept art. You don't read the book
hilarious.
And you're like, yeah, it's funny. It's one of those Lego pieces that's just like a rock.
Dude, and here's the thing, though, is that obviously he doesn't say a single word.
Yeah.
He's just silent the entire book.
But he's a
it's
great
always
character.
Interpreted as fitting to the occasion where it's like his solemn silence was enough to get his point across. Or, they were kind of like, all right, Geode. And they're like, he didn't gloat, though.
Or it'll be like, Geode, what'd you think? And it's like, you could just tell by his silent demeanor what his opinion was.
His calm silence was very reassuring. Stuff like that. It was always interpreted to fit the
Geode
occasion.
didn't have to say a thing. Just being there was enough.
Yeah, it's super funny, dude.
But it's the perfect character for a book because you can write the character versus...
Right.
Like,
it's just one of those things where it's
if
like...
this was a movie and there was just a rock in the corner, it would be irritating.
Yeah.
But because you can write what the characters feel about him or what he feels,
Right.
It's a perfect scenario. So if you're out there and you don't like Geode, whatever, man. I will say
That's
that
just like your opinion,
yeah,
man.
exactly. And he does do things. He does things throughout the book.
He does do things. He saves the day multiple times.
He really does. And I love that they're talking about when they get back from this trip and they make all this money. Leox
himself a good polish.
Yeah, Leox was like, maybe I'll get some of them fancy space boots here I've been hearing about on Coruscant. Hey, maybe Geode will get himself a nice polish. I thought that was freaking funny, dude. I have questions, though. How does he get around?
I think he has to be somewhat force sensitive because how does he push buttons for the navigation?
Well, remember the beginning of Rise of Skywalker when their
Why do you say navigation so weird?
Right? Their light speed skipping at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker, and Poe is walking to the front and he goes, Claude, you working on things? And Claude just goes, and then looks down and okay, so Claude's like a giant slug with eyes. He's basically what are those things that Mike Rowe picks up that's really gross? A gooey duct.
Oh, my God.
And so freaking Claude just goes, and if you're not watching and you're just listening, I'm staring into the microphone. And sparks start shooting off in the Falcon. So apparently, it's not out of... Okay, so people were like, this isn't Star Wars, this is dumb, this is blah, 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 Disney, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing. Okay, Chewbacca, one of the greatest characters in Star Wars history, is a giant Sasquatch character that you never understand a thing he says. And it's not like in books you can read what he says. It literally says, and he uttered a low growl in response. And we just accept it. And I think that this is one of those moments where,
If anything, Geode is the most Star Wars character in this whole book.
that's what I'm saying. I think we've gotten to a point where people, it's funny because pushback because Disney has these views or is PC or whatever. It's funny because now people on the other side who don't like Disney's Star Wars are doing the thing that they're irritated about, which is like, you guys canceled my expanded universe, but now you're not willing to enjoy new stories with new characters. If this rock was in the Darth Bane trilogy, we would never hear the end of how cool it was. But because it's in a, it's in a new medium, people don't appreciate it. But I thought Geode was a cool character. I loved Claudia Gray. Could not have gotten me more attached to a giant rock that was a navigator for a ship. She did a great job.
I remember I really had to come around on this though, because he was like, so this Geode character, and I was like, just you wait.
Right. I will say this: if you're a reader, or if you're a listener, if you're doing audiobooks. This is a book that one of the hard things about the High Republic is you have to establish
there's a lot of
every
setup.
storyline.
Yeah.
And so we got kind of spoiled with, okay, hey, we're used to, even when we went back to the prequels from the original trilogy, we knew who Obi-Wan was. Mm-hmm. We knew of Padme. We knew she was, the person that Anakin falls in love with. We knew who Anakin was. We knew who Palpatine was. There was a lot going on that we were already aware about, so it was just reestablishing established characters. Mm-hmm. The High Republic is having to go in here and do a data dump of all new storylines, all new characters. What are the Jedi most afraid of? And your mind says, well, yeah, the Sith. No, not the Sith. The Sith have been extinct for a millennia. Like, in their mind, the Sith are no more. So what's the biggest threat to the Jedi? Mm. And to me, the biggest threat to the Jedi at this point are things that can limit their ability to use the Force. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're talking about. So it's cool. So they're going on this journey, and then pretty early on in the book, the great disaster takes place.
We've forgotten one character, which is Affie Hollow.
Right.
She's the kind of more the first mate. There's not really any concept art of her, but she's on the cover of the novel. And she works on the vessel with Leox and Geode. And she's kind of the adopted daughter of the person who runs the...
Scover Bind.
Yeah, Scover Bind. She's a bival. If you don't know what that is, if you've watched the Clone Wars, there is that scientist that works with Palpatine on the Zillo Beast.
Yes.
And so that's a bival. Looks kind of like a... I don't know, like a rooster duck.
Yeah, kind of like a dinosaur chicken looking thing with a big... kind of like a goose thing in the middle of their face. But anyways, Affie is on the ship as well.
Mm-hmm. And she's an important character to the novel.
Yeah, she's one of the main characters, I would say. Her and Reath are probably the two main characters, I would say.
For sure.
So they're on their way to the Outer Rim, and the Great Disaster happens, and hyperspace is shut down. Mm-hmm. And so when this happens, they have to stop at what's called, it's just a random station in the middle of space. They didn't really know anything about it. Mm-hmm. And it used to be run by a species called the Amaxines. So they just call it Amaxine Station, which is this bad boy here. Now here's what's interesting is if you're familiar with the Rise of Kylo Ren comic series, you may think that this is a screen grab from that comic series, but it's not. This is a screen grab of a video from the Star Wars YouTube that's describing things within the High Republic. I can't remember what video specifically this is from. But basically, the station is a giant, what do they call it? An arboretum? Mm-hmm. Basically, a giant garden that has been encased with this, these hexagon-shaped glass, makes a sphere. And then it's kind of hard to understand, but if you're just listening, I'm trying to paint a picture for you. So imagine a giant garden that is under a glass dome, basically, and the whole thing is just a sphere. And around it, there are these rings, similar to like what you see with Saturn, but instead of just around the middle, there's also some at each pole. And at the center of these rings is this giant cylinder that runs through the middle of the planet.
Here's the thing.
And that's where you move around in.
Is if you look on the Wikipedia page for the Amaxine Station, there's a conversation snippet from Ben Solo and Snoke
Right.
on that page.
Yeah. Which is interesting. It is very similar. This could be a screen grab from that from that comic, but without the secondary panel showing.
No, it's basic. It is the same picture as the one that's. It's like just from a different angle, and it's kind of decomposed a little bit.
Yeah.
But as far as we can tell, this is where Snoke lives.
So you think that Snoke lives in the exact same station later on? That's pretty cool.
Like on the Wikipedia page, it's kind of confirmed that it's the exact same thing.
So what's crazy about the Amaxine Station is that they get there and there's a little chunk of the book that is focused on these four idols.
Canon confirmed that this is
really?
where Snoke lives.
Dang, that's cool. What a cool connection.
Mm-hmm.
200 years before the original trilogy.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that this, because of, I guess this is like the biggest spoiler we're going to talk about, but it's kind of inhabited by the Drengir, which we've known from, the introduction of the High Republic information.
Right.
What's crazy? Kind of like, there's the Nihil, which is what Light of the Jedi focuses on, but there's also this other villain that's just as threatening.
The Nihil are basically Space Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are these idols that seem to be radiating with the dark side. So the Jedi realized, man, we really need to put a force shield around these things and take them off this station because they're really causing some trouble here. And they kept having nightmares. And then eventually one of the Jedi, Des Rydan, who's Reese's older brother, is thought to have gone missing or died. Kind of vaporated. Just
vaporized.
There you go. Exploded, basically. And so they're thinking, okay, well, now that hyperspace is back open, once it's been restored, let's go back to Coruscant. We'll take these idols with us, and we'll figure out, the safest place for this dark side energy is probably in the Jedi Temple so that it can be monitored and kept away, kind of like the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones.
You know what's interesting is they talk about where they put the idols, and I think they kind of put the idols in the Sith Shrine.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember.
That's talked about in Tarkin.
I can't remember exactly what they talk about, what they call it, but it's like
But it was talking about how
the
old
shadow
it was
underneath
and
or whatever.
The steps were all the way worn down, and
it
talks about how before the Jedi claimed that mountain that it was kind of a dark side nexus.
Yeah, it was a cool connection point there because
mainly to the Tarkin novel.
They were supposed to talk about that in the Clone Wars, and then when Clone Wars was canceled, James Lucino put it in the Tarkin novel of the shrine underneath the Jedi Temple, where it was a Sith shrine that when the Jedi took over Coruscant, they built it on top of that because it was somewhat of a dark side nexus. And if we can put our whole school on top of here, the light of the Force will dampen that darkness. So I guess same thing with these idols. Let's go and put these back where all the crap already is and cover over them with the good. Now the problem is they go to try to take this shield off and figure out, okay, can we defeat the darkness that's contained within these idols? Here's a cool callback to, for those of you who are comic fans, they talk about not knowing exactly what to do because there's only a few other mentions of items that have been imbued with an identity within the dark side of the Force. And what they're referencing is Darth Momin, who is in the Darth Vader comics. And there's a point where Palpatine has just a freaking treasure trove of Sith artifacts, and one of them is this mask, and very similar to Nihilus, where Vader believes that if he can use the power within the mask to open up a portal back into time and save Padme. It's freaking crazy. And Momin outwits Vader and uses it to bring himself back to life, and his spirit inhabits a human being there, and once the human being puts on the mask, he is re-embodied, and his spirit basically takes over that body. It's a very Voldemort kind of experience, and so that's what they're referencing with these idols. Is there's only a few other obstacles that a few other objects they've talked about being Sith personalities having encapsulated themselves inside. So that was kind of it was very cool that I will say this, for all the things you do or don't like about the Disney stuff that they've put out as far as novels and comics and things, they do a great job of tying things to one another.
For sure.
You know, just in these little last few minutes we've been talking, we've referenced Tarkin, we've referenced the comics, we've referenced there's something we're going to talk about towards the end of the book that's from another Vader comic. So basically, when they take these idols away, they find out these idols were not imbued with the dark side. They were a gate that was basically caging this crazy dark side energy, which we didn't know this before. The dark side energy is the Drengir themselves. They are it's kind of hard to see how big these characters are. I guess I can go to the next slide. So you know how big a Wampa is from Hoth. This is a Drengir just completely enveloping and eating a Wampa. And it talks about how their idea of life is to consume. And they're very much fueled by the dark side. It talks about how they were considered a formidable foe by the ancient Sith, which of course makes the Jedi at the time crap their pants because the Sith haven't even been talked about for 1,000 years.
Yeah. So what we find out is the Sith are the ones that actually put those statues there and used those.
Right.
They did a binding ritual, which basically made them the Drengir go dormant.
You know, it's now that I'm thinking about it, it's almost like they did not the same, but similar to the thought bomb that Bane does.
I think the thought bomb is way more extreme.
You can't get out of it.
Actually, like vaporizes anybody involved. But I
guess what I'm thinking of is when I picture it in my mind, there's like this silver floating, like, whatever.
Well, and there's
and
nothing
the souls
visible,
of those people are trapped inside the thought bomb.
I think the difference is that the Drengir are so deeply tied to the dark side itself that it kind of neutralizes their ability to function.
Right. Well, exactly. So the gate that they create, the binding ritual that they perform, basically makes it where they are dormant. And so when they wake up, they see the Jedi's lightsabers and they say, "These are the people who imprisoned us." And then one of the Drengir say, "No, the one who imprisoned us before, their swords that burned were red." It was cool to hear them talk about how they pictured a lightsaber, swords that were burning. So here's not a hiccup for me, but I was confused and I wanted to kind of talk it over with you. So the Drengir are sentient, okay, but they're like only sentient in the fact that they can communicate because they're just obsessed with eating. Like everything is just eating to them. But at the same time, they know how to function hyperspace travel. So to me, it's kind of like almost like a catch-22, like completely enthralled with consuming, and that's like all they think about, which is not really a sentient concept, right? Like any animal in the world, they know they need to eat, but they're also smart enough to travel at light speed.
I don't think they're crippled by... It's just a big part of their existence is that they need to consume, but they're clearly...
Do you think that they're all connected?
They're all the way sentient, and if they were connected like a hive mind, they wouldn't need to communicate amongst themselves like they do.
No, they definitely have different. There's parts where there's parts of the story where you end up finding out that, I mean, I guess we're unpacking the book, so we're just gonna, if you haven't read it and you don't want to know, just leave, I guess. But so Des Rydan was not killed; he was taken via hyperspace to what we assume is their home planet, wherever that is. And so the Drengir have captured him and have basically been questioning him, what's going on. Like, they've been awakened. So does the binding ritual bind them even away from the station?
No. They were trapped there because they knew that they sent their party off and they didn't hear anything about victory or defeat, so they just kind of disappeared.
Right.
So they wouldn't go back to the Amaxian station because they didn't know if it was safe to go.
Right. Okay.
So
they'd
had just been existing there. But
so wherever Des is, life has gone on as usual for the Drengir.
Yeah.
But their ability to continue their conquests to consume and feast on the rest of the galaxy has been halted.
Yeah, so what happened is the Amaxines tried to take over the world where they lived. And
Right.
they set everything up, and then they, I guess, got their crap packed, and the Drangir then returned to the station. And
Right.
then I guess that's where the Sith found them, as they tried to use the station to kind of do a galactic conquest. But I think they hadn't developed hyperspace travel. They were just an incredible warrior race where they existed, and then somebody found them and then unleashed a great evil.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So somehow the Sith come in contact with the Drangir. I guess they find the station as well.
It would be my guess that the Sith would just be aware of such like a great dark side disturbance.
Yeah, similar to Palpatine.
Yeah.
So, okay, so think about this. The Drangir, maybe they're full sentient, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's kind of like us. Okay, if aliens are out there, we don't know how to communicate with them, but they may have knowledge of us. So in the similar state, maybe the Drangir have completely taken over their home planet.
I think about it like the Nogri.
Right, exactly.
That, like they're top dog on their planet, and they're so evolved as far as their ability to fight that they're actually exceptional within the galaxy, but they themselves haven't developed hyperspace travel.
Right. And so the Amaxines try to take over their place, and like you said, they get destroyed, and the Drangir go back
Gave
to
them the old
station.
Uno reverse card.
Yeah. These, I've got one last plan to play. These hands.
Right.
Or these roots, in this case. Okay, so then that's how they get to the station, but before they can leave the station to further their quest to eat, the Sith meet them there, and that's how they've been bound. So now my question is, they've introduced the Drangir as this huge threat, and there are other stories that are happening in the High Republic where they're on a different planet.
Right.
How's this going on?
No freaking clue.
From the Amaxine station?
So
somehow?
if we can kind of, and I really don't know because it's not talked about. I assume all will be revealed in time. And by the way, if you have read the book and you're like, but what about the Nihil? The Nihil do play a part. There are a couple characters that are kind of introduced during the time of the Great Disaster, and then
There's this old Zabrak guy. I can't remember his name. And then the main Nihil character is a girl called Nan. And they're the only two people aboard the station. And they are...
well, they're part of the people that just ended up there during the Great Disaster, and the Jedi aboard the vessel kind of get everybody there. So there were a few ships and a few different parties, but they were kind of left behind when the hyperspace routes opened up because their ship had taken damage.
Yeah. And there's actually a species that... I don't know if this is their first introduction, but there's no pictures of them. And I can't remember their name. But they're talked about as a pink-skinned relative of the Gamorreans. Remember that?
Vaguely.
It was at one of the very beginning. They were like going to kill Nan or whatever, and that's when.
Well, the guy that was going to kidnap Nan, he was a human, I think.
But one of the other characters within there was like basically kind of like no good. They're not pirates per se, but they were just gonna.
Just
I guess
raiders.
everything belongs to me on the station since there's nobody here.
Yeah.
And then the other group that they were kind of gonna bet heads with were those other species.
Yeah.
Those pink pigs.
But anyway, I think the biggest hint that we have about, and I think the Drangir are kind of the answer to a question I asked a few episodes ago, that there's, in the introduction to all the High Republic, it's the same kind of, screen role, if you will. Like the introduction, like war, And I think that the Drangir are kind of the answer to that question about what's the threat to the Force itself.
Right.
And I think we see in the third installment of the High Republic comic, if you go ahead on the slide.
Do you want to finish? Do you want to talk about Marchion just for a second?
He doesn't really come into the book at all.
Well, he's at the end. So to wrap up the story within here, they leave. They realize that two things are wrong. One, the idols they've captured are not evil. They've been holding the evil back. They realize this. So they've got to go put them back where they belong so that the evil that's on that station cannot expand to the rest of the galaxy. Two, as they're doing kind of a recap with your main boy, they realize that the Nihil are this issue, and the Nihil, guy finds out, what is his character's name? Breath finds out that his master has been killed by the Nihil. Mm-hmm. And he's like, so what are the Nihil? What's going on? And they're like, so here's what the Nihil are, kind of catching him up as he's catching them up on what happened on the station. And he realizes, as they're describing it, holy crap, these two characters that we like basically took in and took care of were totally playing us. Mm-hmm. These are Nihil. And so the main Nihil character in the book is Nan, and she's this little girl, probably about the same age as Wreath. Mm-hmm. And she's asking him all these questions. Wow, what does a Jedi do? What's their, almost kind of like a Delilah situation where it's like, so how are you so strong? Mm-hmm. And so he's just like, he's a wealth of knowledge. And to his chagrin, his excitement of being able to finally use his knowledge to help someone else, he's basically just been, diarrhea of the mouth, telling all the ins and outs of the Jedi to this Nihil girl. And so by the end of the story, they've shut the Drengir down on the station. They've rescued Des from their home planet, from the Drengir home planet, but he's like really messed up. Turns out that they have barbs and things on them that poison and almost incapacitate a human being, and we'll get into that in a second. But the book really ends with they put the idols back in place. So at that station, the Drengir are no more.
They actually do is Wreath shoots out one of the walls, and all the Drengir sucked into the vacuum space. Right.
And the idols had been returned.
The idols had been returned, but they needed the Drengir to come up to pose a distraction for the Nihil.
Right.
So that they can make an escape. So they kind of destroy one of the idols so that the Drengir and the Nihil can fight.
Correct.
And then Wreath is caught up in the middle of it, and then he basically creates a vacuum in the station.
And it's a really cool moment where he's like, well, if I miss my master, I know that I'll be one with the Force with her. I did what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. And before he gets sucked into the vacuum of space, there's a hero that saves him. His name? Geode. Somehow Geode steps in the way and kind of saves Wreath. So, long story short, the Drengir on that station are destroyed, but the Drengir at their home planet now know that it is safe to return to...
I think they're stranded, though, because there's a couple of them that come up in the pod that Wreath comes back with Des, mm-hmm. and then there was the pod that Des got launched in. And some of the Drengir come back on that pod.
Right.
But I think those are the only means of... Well, I guess, I don't know. I can't remember how many it said there were.
Well, it's crazy because the thought is somehow they've got to be able to travel, mm-hmm. which is kind of what we're going to get to. So Nan goes and talks to Marchion Ro, the Eye of the Storm, the leader of the Nihil, mm-hmm. and she's telling him, here's the deal, the Jedi destroyed the station, which was a really important and powerful station for the Nihil to use. Mm-hmm. And they killed my master, the Zabrak guy. They killed him, and I'm sorry. And he says, it's not your fault. The Jedi did this, but they're going to pay. And the Nihil will be the destruction of the Jedi. And before, I wouldn't have believed it because they're just people. Mm-hmm. But now I believe that because the Drengir are such a huge threat, that perhaps the Nihil can just strike the last blow.
Yeah.
The straw that breaks the camel's back.
Well, and that he has some sort of awareness of how to weaken the Jedi because of how he deals with Loden Greatstorm.
Right.
In the Light of the Jedi novel, if you've read it.
Yeah, exactly. And so this actually ties really well into the third issue of the High Republic comic books. We're just going to go through some highlights and kind of catch you up on the story and why it's important to the Into the Dark novel. So this is how the Drengir feed. So there are two, Sarit and Tarek, I want to say are their names. They are not conjoined twins in the physical sense, but they are empaths toward one another. So they basically think each other's thoughts, finish each other's sentences. They're both, their pronouns are they, not because of any sexual preference, but because they function as one individual.
They don't exist as a single.
Correct. So this one is the one brother is captured by the Drengir, and the other one is being infested with the dark side energy that his brother is feeling. Mm-hmm. And so the roots of the Drengir are kind of going inside, and it's almost like they're feeding off of him, but they're also working through him. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting concept. Are they feeding off of his force energy? I'm not really sure. But this is a great size comparison for you.
Yeah.
Because the other picture is just like, okay, you have one with the Wampa, but you can't really tell how big the rest of it is. It's just the head bigger. The other picture is just the Drengir by itself. But this one's really great because you have, two humans and I can't remember what species they are, but this Drengir is huge. And it's interesting because it's talking about wanting to feed. That just looks like one individual Drengir, but I guess there are multiple personalities within it.
There were a couple.
What do you think about that?
A couple Drengir. I think there's just more behind them.
Oh, maybe they're talking from behind the main one.
Yeah.
So what's crazy is, if you guys remember from the old Clone Wars, not the 3D animation, but the 2D, the little 5-minute snippets that used to come out back in like 2003, there's a character called Dirge. And Dirge is impervious to any kind of weaponry because his...
Kind of like Deadpool. You just reforms.
His body... It's not like a starfish where if you cut a starfish in half, they form 2 starfish, but his limbs will find one another, reconnect, and reform. And that's very similar to what the Drengir do. Like, you cut off a leg or, a limb or whatever, and it just kind of reforms.
Yeah.
And so the weird thing is that the other brother that's feeling all of the sickness and disease and infestation that the other twin is going through, it's permeating them because they have a combined consciousness. And so Master Skier, who is the Trandoshan Jedi, the darkness that surrounds either the Nihil or the Drengir, I guess it could be the Drengir just because they're close proximity to one another at this point, has really caused him to lash out. That was our question, was how is a freaking Trandoshan going to be a Jedi? But it seems that maybe he's more easily susceptible to things from the dark side. And his Padawan earlier in this comic talks about that it's not like him to lash out or be angry. No one's ever seen him this way. And so there's this moment where he's trying to comfort this Jedi, the Force is your refuge and your strength. Let me show you. And the Drengir, the dark side that resonates within the Drengir, which has compromised this Jedi, lashes out. And I don't know if it's like a freaking, is it like a COVID, like spread by breath, or like what the heck is going on? But the darkness inside of this Jedi attaches itself to Skier. And so it's interesting. It says, poor Jedi, so lost, so alone, come with us, we will make you whole. So they're obviously, like you said, like the same mind. And the last little picture from this comic, which is a terrifying concept, is this isn't the last one. Avar Kriss cuts one directly in half, which seems to do the trick.
Until it doesn't.
The really scary thing is you got 2 Drengir who are still willing to, desiring to fight and to feed, and now Skier, who is the scariest Jedi in this whole group, who's like, Trandoshans are already murderers by nature. Now you have a Jedi who has the Force and it has a lightsaber, and he says the harvest will be bountiful, the harvest will be pure. And that's the latest we have in the...
And think about how large a Trandoshan is and how small he is to these Drengir, man.
Yeah, because a Trandoshan is far and away larger than a human being. Mm-hmm. And they look... I mean, they're
like
behind...
comparable to a Wookiee in size.
Yeah, they're behind him, and they look to probably be almost twice as big.
He's like elbow height to them.
Yeah. And so there's a lot going on. And so...
Still a lot to be discovered. Still a lot of questions.
Right. And there's another adult novel coming, I want to say in June. And it's by Daniel Jose Older, maybe?
Nice.
He's the guy that wrote Last Shot, which I enjoyed. And of course, monthly, these comics are still coming out. So it's going to be March 15th when this episode airs. And so another 2 weeks, and we'll have the 4th installment of what's going on here. Now the question is, are they going to be able to restore Skier, or are they going to have to just do away with him? That's the real question, I guess.
back.
He'll grow back. That's funny. So, what are your thoughts? High Republic, is it what you thought it would be? How do you feel? Is it are you disappointed so far?
No, I'm really enjoying it. I just kind of went in
expectations?
with an open mind, no expectations, just because everything's brand new, kind of. I mean, it's
Right.
still Star Wars, but new timeline, new characters entirely, minus Yoda. New outlook from the Jedi, new oppositional forces that we've never seen. So.
Yeah. How do you create a compelling story where there's no Empire and no Sith to challenge the Jedi and they're at their peak, but nobody wants to read a book where the Jedi are just running around and going to a carnival? So you've got to have some serious opposition. And I think that we're finding here that the Nihil have secrets that we don't know yet. How are they, I guess electricity or something is really dampening the connection to that load and great storm head to the Force and other things that they've got going on in that jail cell, as well as the dark side itself being kind of like the lifeblood of the Drengir, and whether they know what that is or not, it's a part of who they are, but do they know how to use it? Or,
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I think it seems like it's instinctive and they're rather daunting. You know what I mean?
And now we know, okay, that that this planet that Skier was on is not the home planet of the Drengir, because earlier in the comic they talk about people recently having gone missing and they don't know where, and there's a new patch in the field that's this sinkhole that the Drengir live inside. So all that to say, we don't know how yet, but they have found a way off planet, and they found their way to the known universe, and they hunger, and it's a World War Z thing where it's not just the Drengir, it's the Drengir and anyone that they can get their particles on that do the work of the dark side. And so when you think about it, the Jedi don't necessarily fear the Sith as much as they fear the loss of, balance and the dark side itself. And so if the ancient Sith feared the Drengir so much that they had to try to keep them at bay, how much more, if the dark side in the Drengir is so strong that the Sith said, we can't make them subservient, we just have to shut them up, just cage them up. How much more of a threat are they to the Jedi? And so it's an interesting concept. And there's a line from Into the Dark where Jorah Mali, Reed's old master, talks about killing an opponent is not a victory. It's doing what you had to have done. It's not a moment of, that's not the goal. And so as that is something that's part of the mindset of the Jedi at this point, you can't just give the atomic bomb to a whole planet that's filled with Drengir and their, followers now. You have to try to find a way to pull the cord, pull the plug and try to unplug these people's minds from the Drengir. So it's an interesting concept for sure. And then the last thing that I want to say was a cool connection to other things that Disney has done is that Dez, who is the other Jedi that they thought was dead but is brought back, he ends up taking what's called a bearish vow, and he's not leaving the Order, but he's going to go and just meditate on the Force by himself and try to figure out what the Force is, how does the light, how do you be the perfect prism for the light to shoot through, and all these other things. And there are characters in other comics, specifically the Darth Vader comics, who there's a character who took a bearish vow, and basically their commitment is, until I get the answers I'm seeking, I cannot do anything else. And so there's a character that literally Order 66 has taken place in the middle of his bearish vow, and he did not leave to defend other Jedi or to be a part of the Clone Wars or anything like that. Like, I took a bearish vow. It's the most important thing. I have to find these answers from the Force. And so that might be the last we see of Dez Rydan, because he's taking this really, really serious vow that will excommunicate him from the Order until he sees fit that the Force has answered his questions. Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting concept. But it was really good. If you're a reader or if you have a commute and you want to listen to a story, Into the Dark, I recommend it. I do think that you should probably read Light of the Jedi first, obviously to establish characters and what the Great Disaster is, and then you can go into this one, and we'll keep you updated on comics. And then there is new novels coming out between, now and next couple of months. We'll probably take a High Republic break to dive into the next Thrawn book, which comes out in a month. And so some big stuff coming in. So thanks for sticking with us. This is our High Republic catch-up. I hope you enjoyed that sandwich. And we'll see you guys next week. Of course, may the Force be with you.
And remember, the only family you have here is me.
See you next week.